this is just a quick first impressions review of the Zero DS electric motorcycle. I only had a quick 15-minute demo ride, so it's certainly not an in-depth review. I would love to have one for a longer period in future, so I'm able to do a full review, but this is it for now. It was also my first time on an electric motorbike ever, so I thought it was worth sharing my thoughts on that aspect too. So, the exact model I rode was the 11 kilowatt Zero DS ZF14.4. So what on earth does all that mean and all those numbers mean? So the 11 kilowatt means this is the limited power version, but I'll come back to that later. And the 14.4 means it has a larger long range battery pack fitted. So Zero claimed that this bike will do between 1 and 200 miles on a full charge, which sounds pretty practical and like a normal petrol engine motorbike. Big difference between electric and petrol powered motorbikes is where they're most efficient though. So that 100-mile range is when you're at the higher sort of cruising speed, so motorways and that kind of thing. And the 200 miles is at the lower speeds, so typically in town traffic that's all stop-start. That's mainly down to the regeneration system, a bit like Formula 1 cars that puts power back into the battery when you're braking and off the throttle. So think of it like engine braking, but that puts power back into the battery. As I mentioned above, the 11 kilowatt model of the DS is the limited power version. Amazingly, this is actually CBT friendly and can be ridden on L plates, but don't be fooled into thinking that it feels on par with a 125. It's much quicker than that. So there's a strange difference in the law with CBT between petrol and electric. So petrol motorbikes can have up to 14.6 brake horsepower peak power, but electric motorbikes can have that same 14.6 horsepower but measured as continuous power. So the peak power figure of this DS is actually 60 brake horsepower. So a 125 normal one at 14 horsepower, or this at 60 horsepower, and you can still ride it on L plates with a CBT. But even that 60 brake horsepower doesn't really tell the full story, because it's the torque of an electric motorbike that makes it so quick. So all this torque's delivered from 0 revs. So as I said, this so-called low power version of this bike that you can ride on a CBT actually delivers 81 foot-pounds of torque. So if that number means nothing to you, that's around the same as a Triumph Speed Triple sports bike puts out. So absolutely nuts. And a little bit of research online suggests a sort of 0-60 time of less than 4 seconds. And like I say, this is on L plates with a CBT, so there's a real sort of loophole here with electric bikes. So, how did I find this bike to ride? So, when you get on it, everything feels very familiar and just like any other motorbike. Then you notice the lack of a clutch lever. And the really strange first feeling comes when you're ready to go, get on the bike, switch the ignition on, and obviously there's no sort of starter or engine noise, so just the dash lights up and you're sort of ready to go straight away. So a gentle twist of the throttle and you're off. And I literally lasted seconds until I just automatically went for that clutch lever and the gear lever with my foot. But I soon got used to this, and I reckon after about 5 minutes it just felt normal. A bit like if you get on a twist and go scooter, then it just feels natural and normal very quickly. So apart from that, then it feels just like any other motorbike really, but it's just a lot quieter because you haven't got that engine noise. So the torque I mentioned before means it's really quick to get up to speed, and because of the lack of exhaust noise, you actually have to keep an eye on your speed because you don't realise how quick you're going because you haven't got that sort of audio reference. So when accelerating hard, the noise from the motor is actually quite cool, so it reminded me a bit of like a jet or a supercharger, but at low speeds it's almost silent. And the only time I did feel a bit strange on it was when I was doing a little bit of filtering through traffic, and that lack of noise made me feel a bit vulnerable really. I wasn't sure whether other cars had sort of heard me and seen me. So to the brakes, then Again, when I first looked at the bike, I saw it just had a single disc and they looked quite small and quite a thin disc, but they actually worked really, really well, and even the back brake was really good on it. The suspension, that's really good, fairly firm but not uncomfortable, and the handling was really good and predictable too. But you sort of expect this because the suspension's made by Showa and it's fully adjustable too, so I found it slightly firm, but like I say, not uncomfortable. You could probably make it less firm anyway. So the build quality and the quality of all the parts of this bike were really impressive. Overall, it really felt like a really well put together quality product. But then again, you sort of hope that would be the case for what it costs, because yes, it is quite an expensive bike, and you're paying a premium to be an early adopter of this new sort of technology, but at least it's not just about the technology, it's also about getting a quality product, which sometimes isn't the case. So I personally consider Zero to be the sort of Tesla of motorbikes, the sort of top of the game, I think. And just like a Tesla, it's not cheap. So the Zero DS that I was riding is around £12,000 on the road, and that includes a £1,500 sort of low emissions grant that you get from the government. But to balance this out, I guess, then it only costs about a penny a mile to run, and because there's only one moving part in the engine, you don't have a lot of the maintenance. And the battery even has a 5-year warranty too, so actually if you break that up over a 5-year period, it's probably not as expensive as it sounds. So to my usual part of the review, where I list the best and worst things about a bike. So my 3 favourite things about the Zero DS are: number 1, you feel like you're from the future. It really does have that sort of strange I'm living in the future feeling. Number 2, the torque and power delivery is just so instant, and it's really linear and smooth, so it's really quick bike. And number 3 is how easy it was to ride. I didn't know whether you'd have to adjust your riding style, but you didn't at all. I was just on it and riding normally within 5 minutes. As for the negatives, the biggest one is obviously the cost. The second biggest is that unlike a petrol bike, you obviously can't just stop and refuel in a couple of minutes. So the standard sort of plug-in charger, which is just a standard sort of kettle lead, that takes nearly 9 hours for a full charge. But you can get an optional, a cost optional charge tank that allows car superchargers, which are becoming more popular and they're in service stations, that kind of thing, or an optional fast charger that you can use at home or at the office, and that brings it down to just 2 hours. So actually that's not too bad. So apart from that, the only niggles I can think of in that fairly short ride was manoeuvring it just in the car park. I found it had a fairly poor steering lock, and that worry I mentioned earlier about other traffic not hearing you and not knowing you're there when you're in traffic. So in summary, I really did enjoy my first ride on an electric motorbike, and especially this Zero. Beforehand I wasn't sure if it would feel like a prototype and something that still wasn't quite ready to be mainstream, but having ridden it now, I really do think that the Zero feels like a finished product, and I do think it's a viable alternative for some people to a petrol engine motorbike. Like most people I've heard who have tried a Zero, no matter how cynical they were beforehand, they're a bit of a convert, and so am I. So finally, just a quick thank you to the English Electric Motors Company, who let me try a demo bike at the recent motorcycle social event in Leeds. Speaking to the guys there, they really do know the stuff, and it's definitely worth speaking to them if you're interested in riding electric in future. So thanks very much, and I shall see you next Friday.